Chosen one, the moment of your ultimate vindication has arrived, turning your enemies' coordinated malice into their greatest public embarrassment. A whole community teamed up to destroy you and failed miserably in front of everyone. They invested months into a smear campaign and a fractured alliance, uniting only in their obsession with your downfall. Yet the story they carefully crafted is now contradicting itself in real time before the very audience they sought to manipulate. Before the first meeting was held, before the first screenshot was sent, before any of this became the coordinated campaign it eventually turned into, there was a single quiet moment that most people missed entirely. Your presence started disturbing the room, not your words, not your actions, your presence. The simple fact of you showing up, of you existing at a frequency the people around you had not encountered before, that alone started producing a reaction in them that they could not explain and would not examine. You were healing when everyone around you was still bleeding and calling the bleeding normal. You were building when the culture around you had decided that complaining was the same as working. You were moving with a clarity that exposed by contrast alone how directionless everything around you actually was. You did not say a word. You did not have to. Your life was already asking questions that the lives around you could not answer. Right there, in that quiet friction, the seed of everything that followed got planted. Here is what most people miss about how opposition like this actually starts. It does not announce itself. It does not walk up and say, "I see what you are becoming, and I have decided to stop it." It starts with a feeling, an unexplained irritation, a low-grade resentment that the person carrying it cannot quite justify. Someone looks at you, and something inside that person tightens. Instead of asking why that tightening exists, that person starts searching for evidence that you caused it. The evidence gets shared with someone else, slightly adjusted in the retelling to make the sharer feel more justified. And from that small, dishonest adjustment, the whole thing begins to grow. That is where this began. It did not begin with facts. It began with a feeling, specifically, with insecurity that had nowhere to go except outward, in your direction. And the warning that got ignored was the moment those people chose to act on that feeling instead of examine it. The moment they chose the attack over the mirror, they locked in their own outcome. They just did not know it yet. One person's unexplained resentment found another person's unexplained resentment, and then another. People who had nothing in common, who could not previously agree on anything, who carried their own unresolved tensions with each other, suddenly found unity. And what unified them was you, not anything you had done. The idea of you, the discomfort of you, the way your existence, your growth and your peace kept showing up as a quiet indictment of everything around you that had settled for less. A coordinated operation took shape around your name. Consider what it actually takes to make a group of incompatible people agree on something. Consider what kind of gravity has to exist to pull opposing forces into alignment. Group chats were built, discussions were organized. People who barely knew your name and had no real stake in any of this were enrolled in the mission anyway. Information was passed from person to person. Roles were assigned. Some people became the public face, some worked behind the scenes, and some stayed on reserve to be deployed when the moment arrived. This was not petty drama. This was a coordinated campaign built entirely around stopping you. And here is the truth that campaigns like this always confess through their own scale. You do not assemble that kind of coordinated force against someone who does not matter. You do not invest that level of sustained effort into taking down someone who is not a real threat. The size of the operation was its own confession. Your name was being handled like a serious problem that required serious management, and that fact alone tells you more about your power than anything those people ever said about you. You had no backup. You had no allies coordinating on your behalf. You had nothing but whatever was burning inside you that refused to be extinguished, and the entire operation still could not close the deal. The real test, however, had not yet started. At some point, the campaign stopped being about any grievance the people running it could actually name. It stopped being about anything you had genuinely done, and it became something far more revealing about the lives of the people sustaining it. It became a daily practice centered entirely on your name. People who had never shared a genuine conversation with you were presenting themselves to their own circles as authorities on your character. The obsession had graduated past gossip into something that functioned like a shared identity. Being against you had become, for some of those people, the most compelling thing happening in their lives. That single detail exposes more about them than any confrontation ever could. If you felt called by this message, hype this video so other chosen ones like you can be reached. When bringing down another person becomes the most exciting project available to a group, that fact is a portrait of what is missing from every other area of their lives. You became a substitute for purpose, and substitute purposes are violent things. They demand constant feeding. They require escalation to stay interesting. A campaign that runs out of new material has to reach for more dramatic claims to maintain the emotional charge that keeps people engaged. So the effort kept escalating, not because you kept doing things that warranted it, but because the machine those people had built needed fuel to keep running. This is why the campaign felt relentless to you. This is why it did not stop when any reasonable person would have simply moved on. It was not rational, it was compulsive. The intensity was never really about what you had done. It was about the emptiness underneath the obsession, the unlived potential, the unasked questions about their own direction, the growth that had been quietly abandoned in themselves and needed somewhere external to place the blame. Every gathering held in your name was time not invested in their own becoming. Every conversation centered on you was a conversation not happening about their own lives. And while that group was busy managing your story kept moving forward on its own. The gap between where you were going and where they had stayed became visible to everyone watching. You did not engineer that consequence. It is simply what happens when a group substitutes obsession for growth. The person they tried to hold back just keeps moving. The campaign stopped coming at you from the outside and started trying to come through the inside. It came through the familiar, through your history, your vulnerabilities, the people and memories you had trusted with the parts of yourself that were not armored. Everything that could be gathered about your past was gathered. Your lowest moments were collected and reframed. Confessions you had made during seasons when you were still learning to carry what you carry were catalogued and turned against you. Your wounds were not treated as wounds, they were deployed as weapons. Doors you had left open in good faith were entered with calculated force. This was the moment the campaign moved from external pressure into psychological warfare. The goal was to make you question your own reality. The strategy was to use the weight of your own story against you, to make the accumulated record of your humanity look like evidence of your unworthiness. But here is what that strategy could never account for. You cannot weaponize a wound that has already healed. You cannot shame someone with a chapter they have already fully owned. You cannot use a person's past against them when that person has already transformed that past into a foundation. Every piece of ammunition brought against you, your history, your failures, the tender parts of your story, had already been metabolized. You had already done the reckoning. You had already sat in the fire of those memories without flinching and come out the other side, knowing exactly what they meant. What the campaign arrived expecting to find as rubble, it found as bedrock. The campaign assumed your past made you fragile, your past made you forged. Every attempt to find the place where your sense of self was stored came back empty, because that place was somewhere the campaign had no coordinates for and no access to. Now let me put you onto something real, Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching chosen ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation and attacks, while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app, it's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind-programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play, and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your destiny engine for $1 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. Now comes the moment the entire room misread. You went quiet, not because you had nothing left, not because you were crushed. You went quiet because you understood something that no one in that coalition was equipped to recognize. The loudest response to a lie is almost never more noise. The most powerful response is truth, allowed to move on its own timeline, without your interference. The coalition read your silence completely wrong. In a world where volume equals power and whoever speaks first gets believed, your stillness looked like surrender. Your refusal to respond was interpreted as an admission of guilt. The people running the campaign performed confidence about your silence, announced certainty about it, and used it as evidence in their own favor. But that announced certainty was the beginning of their unraveling, because genuine certainty does not need to announce itself. Real certainty is quiet. It does not schedule emergency meetings to remind everyone why the certainty is still warranted. While the campaign was loudly performing its confidence, you were doing something entirely different. You were building. Something was being forged in you, not despite the attack, but because of it. Every wave of pressure was producing an internal calibration that you would never have reached in comfortable conditions. Every false accusation was forcing a specific kind of clarity about who you actually were versus who the campaign was insisting you must be. That kind of knowing, forged under sustained pressure with the heat all the way up, belongs to a different category than anything you can arrive at in peace. Peace gives you space to think. Sustained opposition forces you to know. 2. You were finding out what was solid in you. Every morning you chose not to collapse, not to retaliate, not to become the version of yourself their narrative required. Something in you confirmed itself. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but the way real things confirm themselves, quietly and definitively. You discovered there was a floor underneath everything being thrown at you. No matter how deep the pressure pushed, there was a bottom that held. The campaign had not known that bedrock existed, because until it was tested, you had not fully known it existed either. The trial that was designed to produce your destruction produced your formation instead. The coalition started showing its seams. This is not a prediction about what might happen to people who build on lies. This is a law about what always happens. Fake unity has a specific limit. It runs on the fuel of shared emotion, primarily anger and resentment, and the moment that fuel starts running low, the fractures that were always present in the structure become visible. People who had joined for different reasons started pulling in different directions. One version of the story stopped matching a previous version. A detail surfaced that made the whole sequence harder to defend. Someone inside the group started asking the questions that were supposed to stay unasked. And once those questions started circulating, there was no putting them back. A lie requires everyone who knows it to keep actively choosing it every single time. One moment of honest doubt, one conversation where someone genuinely asks whether any of this actually adds up, and the architecture of the whole thing becomes visible for exactly what it is, not justice, not truth. A performance that required its audience to stop thinking in order to keep running. You outlasted that performance. You did not destroy it, you outlasted it, and that is the more complete form of winning, because it means the collapse came from inside the structure the campaign built. Truth moved on its own. It found its own way out of closed rooms and into the light where people could finally see clearly. The stage that had been built for your destruction began to collapse under its own weight, and the audience that had been recruited to watch your fall was about to witness something entirely different from what they had been promised. The unraveling was not quiet. It was not a private correction or a behind-closed-doors shift in sentiment. It was a visible, undeniable public collapse in front of the same crowd that had watched the campaign perform its confidence about you with such apparent certainty. The stories stopped lining up. The timeline, when examined clearly, did not make sense. The motivations, under even minimal scrutiny, revealed themselves for what they were. Details that were supposed to prove the case started contradicting each other in ways that were impossible to explain away. And the audience that had been nudged toward a particular conclusion about you started doing the one thing the entire operation had depended on them never doing. They started thinking for themselves. Here is what makes this kind of divine justice different from anything you could have engineered on your own. You did not need to do anything dramatic. No counter-campaign, no strategic release of evidence, no calculated public move. The truth came out the way it always does, when it is actually the truth, naturally, irresistibly, without needing an advocate. The only thing required of you was that you stayed true and stayed standing. You had done both. And now it was the campaign's turn to answer for itself in public, in front of the same witnesses it had recruited. The bold confidence that had been performed across that entire season began visibly draining in real time, not because anyone was handing down punishment, because the truth had arrived and there was genuinely nowhere to put it. The people who had spoken your name with contempt began speaking it carefully. The rooms that had echoed with certainty went quiet with something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. A performance that had run with such confidence for so long simply ran out of audience. They had wanted a performance, they got one, just not the one they had written for you. Now that the dust has settled enough to see clearly, look honestly at what that whole operation actually was. Every person in that coalition had something in common, not a shared grievance, not a common truth, but a shared need to avoid being the one in the room most aware of how much personal potential they had quietly abandoned. You were not their problem because of what you did. You were their problem because of what you reflected. Each person who joined that campaign brought their own version of the same private resentment. The resentment that surfaces in someone who sees, in another person's growth, the unmistakable distance between where they are and where they know they could have pushed themselves. That is what lived inside those group chats. It was not justice, it was the collected weight of unlived potential turned outward, because turning it inward was too uncomfortable to face. In psychology, this pattern has a specific name: mobbing. A group targets an individual, not because of anything that individual has genuinely done wrong, but because that person's presence forces the group to confront what it has been collectively avoiding about itself. It is not rational, it is primal. It is the ancient mechanism of pushing out whoever is growing, whoever carries something different, whoever cannot be managed into comfortable smallness. And the mechanism has one fatal assumption built into it, that the person being targeted will eventually break under the weight of collective disapproval. That assumption only holds when the targeted person's sense of self lives outside, in approval, in belonging, in the reflected opinion of a community. When someone's foundation is internal, when their identity does not depend on community acceptance to hold its shape, the mechanism runs its full course and comes back empty. The isolation cannot isolate what was never dependent on company. The withdrawal of approval cannot diminish what was never built on approval in the first place. You were that person. That is exactly who the campaign ran into. And the entire confession of the operation, its real meaning, was hiding in plain sight inside its own scale the entire time. You do not assemble that much coordinated force against someone who is nothing. The army was proof of everything it set out to deny. While the campaign was busy conducting its version of a trial, presenting evidence, building its case, performing its verdict in front of an audience, something else was happening simultaneously at a level no one in the coalition had the awareness to perceive. Every choice made in response to you, every lie passed forward, every person recruited under false pretenses, every moment someone traded integrity for continued participation, all of it was being recorded in a way that has nothing to do with screenshots or witnesses. You were not the one being judged. You were the instrument through which everyone around you revealed their actual character. Your authentic, unperformed presence created a condition that made it impossible for the people around you to remain concealed. The patient ones showed their patience. The loyal ones showed their loyalty. The ones whose alignment was always conditional, whose concern was always costumed resentment, whose support was always transactional, they showed that too. Not because you exposed them deliberately, because your consistency functioned as a mirror they could not avoid standing in front of. People who have spent a long time avoiding their own reflection do not respond to mirrors with gratitude. They attack them, and in attacking they revealed precisely who they were. This was not just a betrayal, it was a sorting, the loyal from the opportunistic, the aligned from the performative, the people who could handle truth from the ones who needed comfortable lies to sustain their self-image. You did not orchestrate any of it. You simply existed in your truth, long enough and consistently enough for the sorting to complete itself on its own. And the judgment, when it finally arrived, did not land where the campaign had spent so much energy insisting it would land. It landed on them. Look honestly at what the campaign accomplished, not what it intended, but what it actually produced. The campaign wanted your silence. Instead, it produced someone who now speaks with a weight and authority that comes specifically from having been tested at the level you were tested. That authority was forged in the exact furnace they lit, which means they built the very thing they were trying to prevent. The campaign wanted your isolation. Instead, it produced someone who now operates from a foundation so internal, so independent, and so completely unattached to the validation of any community that no coalition of any size can reach it. The campaign wanted to discredit you. Instead, through the very spectacle of its own public unraveling, it produced the clearest possible evidence that you had been telling the truth the whole time. The campaign wanted you erased. Instead, it made your name impossible to forget and impossible to mention now without calling up the full memory of what was tried and what failed. Every single thing deployed against you became, in the execution, the precise opposite of what it was intended to produce. Not because you were clever enough to engineer that reversal, because that is what happens when what you are standing for is actually true. Truth is self-protecting in a way that no strategy can fully replicate. You can build an entire campaign on top of truth, sustain that campaign across many seasons, recruit every available person to confirm that the truth does not exist, and the truth will still be there when you are done, unchanged, unmoved, waiting. The people who bet everything on your collapse now have to live in the world where that bet was lost publicly. Your name carries a before and after that everyone in that community has full access to. They know what was promised would happen. They can see what actually happened. Every time your name surfaces now, it carries the full record of what was tried and what remained standing. That is not a punishment you arranged. It is a consequence the truth arranged. And it is permanent, in a way that no human act of revenge could ever be. This is not a petty victory. This is dominion, the specific kind that only comes to someone who has been through exactly what you have been through and refused, at every available opportunity, to become defined by it. Here is the part that used to feel like abandonment. Now let it feel like what it actually was, the most deliberate and purposeful act of preparation you have ever received. Every person who walked away at the wrong moment did so for a reason. Every support structure that collapsed exactly when you needed it most collapsed for a reason. Every would-be ally who disappeared when the pressure became real disappeared for a reason. Every season where you stood completely alone with no visible sign that anything was going to change served a specific purpose in what was being built in you. That was not abandonment, that was preparation. The stage was cleared on purpose, cleared of everyone who would have tried to insert themselves into the credit for what was coming. If anyone had been close enough to help you up, that person would have later told the story as though they were the reason you made it. If someone had been present when you found your footing again, that person would have worked themselves into the testimony, and the testimony being written across the full course of your trial was never designed to be shared. It was designed to be singular, to carry the specific weight of undeniable, unattributable transformation that gets diluted the moment another hand is involved in it. You had to go through the fire without a net, not because you were not worth protecting, because the story of how you came out the other side needed to be unmistakably clear about what actually kept you. Not a mentor, not a circle, not a loyal person who stayed when everyone else left. Just you, and what was working through you, and the internal voice that kept producing one more day, one more choice, one more refusal to become what the attack was trying to make you. Nobody can claim credit for what followed. Nobody can insert themselves into what you became. The people who counted you out are now watching something they genuinely cannot explain. And the people who stood at a safe distance waiting to see which way things would go are watching you from a very different kind of distance, now the distance of people who underestimated what they were looking at. The aloneness was the architecture, the isolation was the insulation, and now the victory belongs entirely and unmistakably to you. Your name moves through those rooms differently. It used to carry what the campaign put on it: suspicion, scandal, the coordinated weight of a manufactured narrative. Now it carries something that cannot be manufactured, cannot be competed with, and cannot be diluted by anything those people do next. It carries evidence, the evidence of a campaign that failed publicly, in front of witnesses, the evidence of a foundation that could not be reached by people who had every available resource and still could not close the deal, the evidence of a life that continued, flourished, and elevated in direct contradiction to everything that was said would happen to you. That evidence is not going anywhere. It is not fading. It is compounding. Every day you keep moving forward, every layer of growth that becomes visible, every moment of genuine peace you inhabit, it adds to a case that is now impossible to argue against. The storm that opened this story was never the obstacle, it was the introduction. The whole community that assembled to witness your destruction is instead witnessing your elevation. The people who were supposed to serve as proof of your unworthiness are, by their own visible failure and quiet unraveling, now serving as proof of your vindication. You do not have to reference it. You do not have to perform the comeback for anyone. The comeback is simply your life continuing, you being exactly who you always were, but fully now, without the second guessing that their pressure was designed to produce, without any remaining need for their verdict on who you are. Here is what being on the other side of this actually means for you going forward. You no longer require comfortable conditions to operate. You have already proven that you can build in the dark, move forward under sustained pressure, and stay grounded when the ground itself is being pulled from under you. That is not a soft skill. That is a rare and specific kind of competence that most people spend their whole lives avoiding because the price of acquiring it is too high. You paid the price. The competence is yours now. It does not expire, does not diminish, and does not get taken back when the season changes. The version of you that once doubted, the version that briefly entertained the idea that the community might have a point, that maybe you were too much or not enough in the exact ways they kept insisting, that version has been answered, not by argument, but by outcome. You lived past the verdict they tried to make permanent. You kept building past the ceiling they tried to install. The doubt has been addressed by reality in a way that no amount of reassurance could ever have addressed it. You know now, not because someone told you, but because you walked through the test and came out the other side, holding proof that you wrote yourself. The same discernment that was sharpened through this season is now permanently active in you. You can feel misaligned energy before it announces itself. You can read the difference between someone who is genuinely in your corner and someone who is performing alliance while building something else entirely. You can recognize the early formations of what escalated into a full campaign against you because you have already seen exactly how it runs and exactly how it ends. You have the map now, and having the map does not make you paranoid, it makes you protected. Walk into every room from this point forward in full possession of who you are and what you have survived. Carry it not as a wound you are still nursing, but as a credential, as evidence of a specific kind of durability that most people in those rooms do not possess and cannot fake their way into possessing. There is a bearing that comes from having been through the fire and knowing with certainty that the fire did not take you. You carry that bearing whether you announce it or not, and people feel it. The room adjusts when you enter, not because of performance, but because of the specific gravity that belongs to someone who knows exactly where their floor is and has stood on it under conditions that would have eliminated most contenders. The community that teamed up against you failed at something very specific. They failed to stop what was already in motion in you. What is in motion in you cannot be stopped by a campaign, cannot be countered by a coordinated effort, and cannot be dismantled by any number of people choosing to align against it. What is in motion lives in you, was confirmed by everything you survived, and is expressed through the simple, daily, unstoppable act of you continuing to become who you are. The whole community teamed up, the whole community failed, and the whole community is watching what came next. You were not the one being consumed by the fire, you were the one the fire was making, and now you are made. Walk like it, build like it. Move like someone who knows that everything thrown at you became the exact material you were built from, because that is precisely what happened, and the whole world is about to see what that means.